Hey folks, and welcome into another episode. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I'm an instructional designer for MIT, and I'm also an online instructor and founder of Instructional Design Institute. My purpose is to help you make the online learning experience come alive for you and for your students. You can find all my information over at drlukehobson.com. This show, as you can probably tell, it's a solo episode that I really want to talk to you, the teacher, the educator, or the instructional designer who's been talking more about what their world is really like to those outsiders looking in. And I was recently reading an article that mentioned how 1 out of every 5 teachers will pursue a new career in 2021. The comments section were filled with baffled readers, but I wasn't really surprised. Over the winter break, I actually talked to 5 teachers who wanted to become instructional designers, and they were asking about how do I make this transition into a reality. Each conversation revolved around what piece of advice I would give to them, and then now, of course, the challenging thing about all of this is that I could talk about instructional design all day. So trying to pick just one piece of advice, that really wasn't going to cut it. Instead, I came up with 5 tips, 5 recommendations, whatever you want to call it, on how to make this transition a reality. Is it a complete list? Absolutely not. Will this list change depending upon what industry you want to work in? You bet. For now, it's a starting point to help you learn the fundamentals and prep you for a few interview questions. If you are looking for something that's more in-depth and expansive, well then I would definitely recommend that you watch the video that I'm going to link in the show notes below, and that video is called What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer. I go into all the tips, I go into all the weeds of that one, and I offer you a bit more about my perspective of the role and what I've been telling new instructional designers. So with that said, here are the 5 tips on transitioning into our learning nerd world. Number 1 is to decide the right path for you. When you were a kid, were you ever asked the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, it's time to ask yourself that question, but rephrase it to say, what kind of instructional designer do I want to be when I grow up? The instructional design field is rapidly growing every day, and while that's fantastic, it's also confusing. Instructional designers are in every sector, from higher education, corporate, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and even the freelance field. I just saw postings yesterday for an instructional designer for Reddit. Like, what? But that's reality. So just saying that you want to be an instructional designer is like saying that you want to be a physician, but not saying what type of physician. Every call I have of a new instructional designer covers this topic because the skill sets of an instructional designer working at a university could be entirely different from an ID working for a corporation. This isn't to say that one is right and one is wrong, but more of I want you to find meaning in your work and be fulfilled. For me, it's been working in higher education and knowing that I am providing real tangible skills for my students, that when they transition over into the real world, they're going to be prepared. For you, it could be more about leading trainings and changing the workforce for the better. It completely all depends. To give you more of a perspective on this, do a job search for instructional designer, quote unquote, on LinkedIn Jobs and compare and contrast what you find. You'll notice that the job responsibilities and skill set requirements are vastly different from one field to another. If you really get into the tiny details, you'll notice too that the size of an organization, even in the same field, will be different, such as working for a university with thousands of students compared to a smaller community college. My best piece of advice is to talk to instructional designers in their field and see what they like and what they dislike about their roles. No job is perfect. I work at MIT, which is perhaps the coolest place ever, but still, there are some things about my role that I wish I can change. You can also listen to my podcast episode with Heidi Kirby as we explore the differences between working as IDs in higher education versus corporate. It was incredibly insightful to talk about our experiences with technical skills, with salary expectations, benefits, perks, other job responsibilities, and everything else. We covered all of it. It was a two-part episode. You can listen to them in the show notes below. I'll be sure to link both of them down there. Number 2, updating your resume or CV. I hate to put something so cliche on this list, but it's a necessity. The reality is that we still live in a world where your resume is going to be looked at first before anything else. I've seen quite a few resumes from teachers lately, and I noticed a common theme, and that's underselling the power of being a teacher. Being a teacher isn't easy, and I've seen resumes that basically say, quote unquote, taught courses as an accomplishment. Like, what do you mean? Like, there are so many accomplishments to unpack from those words. The issue, and this can be with any job, by the way, is that when you've been in the trenches for the same role for so long, all responsibilities are perceived as common and normal. When you have an outsider looking in, though, that's when you're going to notice your accomplishments and hear more about them. For instance, I had a call with a friend the other day who's looking to transition to becoming an ID, and she's a teacher. As we talked more about her current role and how she designed her curriculum, several words popped up, and I was just like, oh my gosh, why are you not including these in your resume? And those words included universal design for learning, competency-based education, project-based learning, designing lesson plans with the outcomes first, which is backwards design, or how she transformed her remote learning experiences to be effective, and then teaching that to others to make sure that all students are enjoying the experience. She also, too, talked about improving achievement rates and many other things. All of these are major points in instructional design. Hiring managers are looking for a lot of those key words that I just said. So the other thing too with that is to not only list all of those, but be as specific as possible with your accomplishments, and don't be afraid to throw in some metrics. Throw in some numbers, people. It's a good thing. Numbers stand out in particular from all of the text. Whether you improved intention rates or were responsible for a budget, document these points. If you want to read a great article that talks more about this specifically, my friend Dr. Nicole Papiana-Lugera wrote a great article that talks all about these things. Once again, the link is in the show notes below. Number 3 is knowing how we learn. Instructional designers are problem solvers. How do we solve problems? We know how to identify gaps in knowledge and build the right steps to create a meaningful learning experience. This all starts with the basics of how human beings learn. As teachers, I'm sure you know how the students learn and have probably had training or exposure to things like cognitive load theory, behaviorism, constructivism, humanism, or connectivism. You may also know about the tried and true theories like Bloom's taxonomy, Gagne's 9 levels of learning, and there are many, many more. If you are searching for an instructional design role, I would suggest to dive into a bit of andragogy. That is the science behind how adults learn. The reason being is because designing courses for adults who have several barriers to learning pertaining to time, energy, self-efficacy, prior knowledge, and many other elements, it's different compared to designing courses for the younger generation. Now, don't get me wrong. Are there similarities between adults and children? Absolutely. Yet you'll notice you will design course activities differently when you are cognizant of what adults face. There are times when you will only have a few hours to grab an adult learner's attention. The content must be engaging and transparent to show the purpose behind the why. Why are you asking students to participate in assignment? Why are they doing this? Why are they watching this video? Why are they answering this reflection question? You need to make sure that it's crystal clear. If you lose the clarity and the reasoning, chances are that you're going to see a drop in student participation. Thinking about these barriers will make you become a better instructional designer. If you are looking for a book to learn more about learning, I would certainly recommend either Make It Stick or How Learning Works. Number 4 is explaining an instructional design model. Instructional designers like processes, models, and frameworks. I find this slightly ironic as most IDs will have a story or two about a time when all of the rules went out the window in order to launch a course on time. Projects are usually not as linear as one would think, and that's why learning engineering is really fascinating to me. I had a conversation with Dr. Aaron Kessler from MIT the other day about learning engineering. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, definitely do it. It's amazing. But anyway, I digress. Most organizations use one instructional design model in particular, like backwards design, ADDIE, Agile, or SAM. The important part here is not to learn every single model, but to focus on one that you find effective and then learn everything about it. Think about courses you designed in the past and see how your design process aligns with the known ID models. I mentioned previously about how my friend used backwards design, but she didn't know the technical name of the process, and I'm sure you'll have a similar experience. If you don't have experience with any of these models in particular, find the one that you like best and dive into the research. There will without a doubt be a question in an instructional design interview about walking the interviewers through a design process. This could be specific, or it could be something very generic, as in, tell me about how you would design a course on architecture. I heard that one from a friend lately, so that is a legitimate interview question for an instructional design role. Now, this is, of course, not to say that every interview is going to have amazing questions, but you get my point. You want to be able to be prepared just in case for anything. My best piece of advice here is to learn one model and then practice trying to teach it. Use your creativity. Make a speech about it. Draw the steps on a whiteboard. Use a Google Sheet or whatever you want to do. You need to become so comfortable with this that it's a natural process to talk about. And last, but absolutely not least, because this is the one that gets everybody, is working with SMEES, or if you've never heard of that term before, subject matter experts. So SMEES are vital to projects, and chances are you'll be asked in an interview about how you collaborate with them. Working with SMEES is a delicate balance, and it's essentially an entire part of instructional design. If I had to categorize what we do, I would say that we design learning experiences, we manage projects, and we manage relationships. Many new instructional designers worry that they aren't knowledgeable enough in every area to design a course. They are thinking about trying to be the SME themselves. And I've answered this question many times of like, do I need to know basically everything about everything if I'm asked to design a course on X, Y, or Z? I'm like, no. The SME is the person who is the knowledgeable one. So for us, what you do need to learn though is about how to negotiate, how to influence, and how to persuade others. These are things that you are not taught in school that you need to know how to do. Instructional designers are often in a position where we know what's best for the students and for the student experience, and the SME isn't aligning with the course's intention. So how do you manage someone when you don't have the power? The SME doesn't report to you, and you may not have the final say on the project. That is when these people skills are really crucial to guiding the project to make sure it's on track. For instance, most SMEs will want students to learn literally everything on one topic because, of course, they've taught this course or maybe a series of courses a number of times, and they feel that everything is important for students to learn because they're so passionate about this, which is fantastic. But the reality is your course is only going to be intended for, let's say, 8 weeks in length. Well, what do? You have to make that judgment call as the instructional designer on the right amount of information for students to learn and, of course, to prevent them from burning out. You need to keep the learning experience in the back of your mind. You also need to keep an open mind about what the SME is saying and their feelings behind their words. I remember working with a SME years ago, and he was resistant to any suggestion I mentioned. It was frustrating, and it started to eat away at me because I knew we were in for a long and bumpy road if we kept on arguing. I managed to have a phone call with him one day, and I just asked about his perspective on the design process. I was just trying to uncover what was really going on here because I felt tension. I couldn't figure it out. Well, he opened up to me after we talked for a bit of time about how he's been teaching this same course content for over 20 years, and he felt as if this online course was going to replace him. And honestly, I had never thought about it from this perspective before. Most people are resistant to change, but he was resistant in fear of losing his job, and that's very understandable. Well, that conversation changed the way of how I approach talking about instructional design with SMEES to explaining more about the purpose of why working together can be so beneficial to students. And the long story short of this one is that this SME ended up loving the course in the end, and he was actually shocked by how many student testimonials we gathered when the course was all said and done. So the thing is, what I'm trying to say, in a long way, is that working with SMEES is an equal partnership. And when there is a mutual respect and you are on the same page, that's when the magic happens. I am still baffled by the lack of trainings and education out there about really how to influence, how to negotiate, how to persuade, and really in general, just like how to work with SMEES. Some of the students in Instructional Design Institute asked for more tips on really how to collaborate with SMEES, and that is one of the latest modules that did come out. So if you're interested in learning more about my tips and tricks and what I do to basically manage relationships, go down into the show notes below. You're going to find a free trial link for 30 days, and that'll let you check out that module. And if you like everything else, awesome, then welcome on in. But my friends, that's it for now. Are there more things to know about this field? Yes, and I'll probably write a book about it someday if I'm being honest. I don't know when that's going to happen, but it's been on the back of my mind for a while, so maybe there'll be a thing that will come out in the future. We'll see. Time will tell. I don't want to overwhelm you, though, so those are just the basics with trying to become an instructional designer. Overall, the instructional design field has given my work a sense of purpose that I've never had before. That's why I'm so passionate about this. It's why I love what I do. I love changing students' lives for the better because my education growing up wasn't that great. So I want to be able to, in turn, do as much as I possibly can for the student experience. So hence why I love instructional design. Whether you are looking to change the lives of students or if you're just looking to transform the workforce and make something absolutely amazing and awesome, because certainly we need help in that area too, there is an instructional design job out there for anybody. You just got to find it. If you like my babbling about instructional design and online learning, subscribe to the mailing list. That's when you're going to get the latest and greatest updates from me and a whole bunch of other things as well. It's the best way to stay up to date too with the blog, the podcast, the YouTube channel, and Instructional Design Institute. We got a lot of things going on here, people. So if you want to follow along, all those links are down there in the show notes below. Do me a favor and share this podcast episode on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter, and really send it to a teacher. This has been the topic that I keep on reading about over and over and over again, is how to transition from a teacher to becoming an instructional designer. And these are some of the tips that I haven't really read too much in other blog posts and articles and whatnot, so definitely wanted to share everything that I've learned about so far for what teachers have been experiencing and what they can do to actually become an instructional designer. But that is it, my friends. Stay nerdy out there, and I'll talk to you next time.